Very much. Welcome back, everybody. We're winding down to our final session. Such a time as this, current issues facing Igbos and Black America, with our special moderator, the Events and Community Service Chair for UIU DMV, Uju Obianwu.
Okay, well, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to be here. Thank you for having me. Greetings from the DMV. I'm excited for us to delve into this and to continue on from our town hall conversations.
So we'll go ahead and get started. This session is very, very important to us as Igbos in the diaspora, as well as for all the Black people, right, in this country and abroad. Over the past few weeks, we have experienced a lot of civil unrest in this nation that some of us may call home. Inexcusable losses of Black lives due to police brutality, due to racism, has triggered an outpouring of protests for racial justice around the world. So for the first time in our generation, the nation appears to have reached a critical mass, and we are really dissatisfied with what's happening around the world today. So we have put together an amazing panel. Our moderator, Uju, who's joining us from the DMV area, our speaker, Adaobi, who's joining us from the Minneapolis, Twin Cities area, our amazing speaker, Ify and Sam, who are gonna be just having an open, transparent dialogue on what it means to be Igbo in the diaspora, but also what it means to be Black in the diaspora. So Uju, please feel free to take it away. We will definitely be looking for questions in the comment section. So please feel free to write your questions down, and in the middle of the conversation or towards the end of the conversation, we will continue to engage the attendees. So please take it away, and please know that this is going to be a very, transparent conversation. So open spaces for us to dialogue and really discuss what's happening today.
So thank you so much for the introduction, and this is a great conversation that is meant to be a conversation, as we mentioned. It's a continuation from the town halls that we had earlier this summer, in which we were speaking about the civil unrest and the racial injustice that was occurring not only here but back home. So we want to continue to place action items and make it so that we as an organization are able to leave our imprint on history in terms of what is going on here and back home. So without further ado, if you have been a part of our previous town halls and you're joining us today, this is going to be a new conversation. And if you're here for the first time, of course, you'll be up to speed in no time. Okay, so today we are joined by some familiar faces. We have Adaobi. Adaobi, would you like to wave? Perfect, perfect, perfect. So Adaobi is an executive director of Twin Cities Media Alliance and publisher of TCMA's flagship project, the Twin Cities Daily Planet, an award-winning online news publication dedicated to amplifying and connecting marginalized voices. Prior to TCMA, Adaobi was the principal strategist at Coloring Circles, LLC, a marketing studio in Minneapolis that works with mission-driven organizations, initiatives, and artists. She's often seen as an instigator for thinking of fresh, smart ways for solving problems, and is known for exploring the intersections of multimedia, creativity, and innovation, story, and activism in her work. And she continues to serve in continuous committees, panels, programs, and organizations that help Minneapolis thrive. So, Adaobi, would you like to give us a quick hello?
You said, would I like to what?
Give a quick hello.
Oh, greetings, everyone. I'm happy you didn't read that full bio, because Igbo people like long. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a lot more that is to be said about you, of course, and I know that we'll probably touch on it today. But just in short, you're amazing. You're doing amazing work, and we're so happy to have you. So, thank you. And we're joined by another familiar face, Sam. Sam, would you like to give a quick wave? Perfect. Sam is an NFL player, writer, public speaker, humanitarian, and follower of Jesus Christ. He speaks widely at colleges, events, conferences, and churches, and is the co-host of the Home Team podcast. He is the proud founder and president of Athletes for Justice, as well as vice president of the NFL Players Association, where his main goal is to advocate for NFL players around the league. He is a proud graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and received his MBA from the Thunderbird School of Global Management in Arizona. His new book, Let the World See You: How to Be Real in a World Full of Fakes, is available now for pre-order on his website. And he was actually also our featured author on the main page of UIU. So, Sam, give us a quick hello.
Hey, thank you all so much for having me. I'm really, really excited and glad to be here. And I'm excited for this conversation we get to have. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes. So we also have our next speaker, Ify Ike. Is she on? Yes, here you are. Give us a quick hello, another familiar face. I love the twist. I love the glasses too. We can't hear you, but I think you said thanks. Perfect. So Ify is a first-generation social impact entrepreneur, attorney, and professor with a deep career in social and civic empowerment, and a public leader in key social issues, including the state of women and girls of color, diversity and inclusion, tech equity, and mental health. She's an award-winning problem solver and the co-founding partner of social impact and equity firm Think Rubik's LLC. She's the co-founder of Black and Brown People Vote, Black Policy Lab, and just recently launched the PC Way, also known as Pink Cornrows, which centers and trains diverse communities to champion equitable policies. And she's an accomplished political leader and was a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Fellow and served as a policy advisor and counsel in Congress. She ran for office in New York City and served as the transition chair of New York City Public Advocate Jermaine Williams, leading the redesign of the second highest office in New York City. Ify is also a professor at Lehman College in both their political science and African American Studies departments. So give a quick hello.
Yeah, I don't know who gave you, I agree with Adaobi. I don't know who gave you that bio. But yes, hi everyone, that is me. I'm happy to see you, Uju. It's always great to see your face, great to see Adaobi and Sam again. Really excited about this conversation. The last panel was amazing. So I wanna also congratulate the UIU team. It's not easy to pull together this type of a conference with so many Igbos that have something to say. So looking forward to the conversation, but also looking forward to the Q&A as well. So thank you.
Perfect. So same house rules as last time. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. We will call on you in order. And of course, no interruption. This is a free forum for free thinking, free speech, and of course, opinion. So there will be questions geared specifically to our panelists, but also communication should be across the board so that everyone can feel free to have their voice heard. That being said, to our panelists, what does Black Lives Matter mean to you?
So I'll jump in very quickly, but I think we'll all probably, double dutch with each other. And I again want to just highlight the work and the energy that Adaobi and many of those in the Midwest have endured out in Minnesota. Before there were hashtags, before we heard anything like social impact, anything like that, I want it to be clear that the movement for liberation of Black lives literally started on the coasts of Africa, right? That we were not just taken and brought here, it was violent. For anyone who has seen any of the ports of no return, whether in Ghana, I personally have gone to the one in Benin, when you see what and really fully appreciate what it means to be tricked, kidnapped, captured, put into dungeons, and then march into the water before you get into a boat, you recognize that part of the reason why they had to have people march into the water is because Africans were always fighting. They were fighting, and those that took our bodies did not want to come onto shore because they knew that we would have the advantage on the land, and they had us chained and going into the water. And why is that important? I think it's important as we center ourselves as who we are as Nigerians, as Igbo people, but as people who are also Black. It's important that we make sure that we are connecting. I heard a lot in the last conversation about culture, but that we are also making sure that Black Lives Matter is not seen as just an African American struggle, that it is a large struggle, a Black struggle, that is about the liberation of being our full selves without oppression, without suppression, and ensuring that the policies that were created intentionally to make sure that we do not thrive, whether it's here, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in our own land, right? Where Vivian, who spoke amazingly, also talked about how she has to overcome struggles just to compete with everyone else. Now, I know everyone felt like that's a great thing, that she's thriving and that she's competing. As a woman who also endures racism on a daily basis, sexism on a daily basis, and if we're going to be honest with ourselves, even within the Nigerian community, sometimes we can have some classism that also prevents us from building together. Black Lives Matter literally means that in the spaces, whether locally or globally, that we are acknowledging that each life is worth preserving, that each life is worth fighting for, and we don't have to wait for it to come to our door for us to determine if we're going to fight for each other. So that's an extremely broad global level, but I do think it's important for us to recognize that it didn't just start with Trayvon, it didn't just start with Breonna Taylor, it didn't just start with George Floyd. That liberation work has always been what has driven everyone from Harriet Tubman to Nat Turner to those who won rebellions and those who died trying to get free. That Black Lives Matter is ultimately about liberation of all Black life. And until we're all free, none of us are free.
Perfect. Sam, would you like to chime in on what Black Lives Matter means to you?
Yeah, for me, I think about some of the language and the conversations we've had about the Black Lives Matter movement. And one thing that really stuck out to me the most is I saw a sign and protesting, and the sign said that matter is the minimum. Matter is the minimum. It's funny how the slogan is Black Lives Matter, and we're trying to rally people around this saying and this idea, and this it's somewhat of a new idea to a lot of people, where, as Ify said earlier, many people put policies in place to keep Black lives at the very bottom, very, very bottom. And so right now we're at a point where we're saying, hey, let's matter. Matter is the minimum, but what about getting to a place where we can say, man, Black lives are thriving, right? We look at the Tulsa riots back in, I believe it was 1919 or 1921. Black lives were thriving then, and all of a sudden, the community of Black lives that were thriving was burned down. And so we're trying to get to a place where Black lives matter, number one. Number two, Black lives thrive, but also the people who are intimidated by the thriving or the success of Black lives, now there's some type of understanding that, hey, just because one life and one group of people who looks like you and who maybe you're not as comfortable with, just because they're being successful, you don't have to hate them. You don't have to continue to oppress them with certain microaggressions or even overt racism. That doesn't need to be in our vocabulary. It doesn't need to be in our everyday living. And so when I hear the term Black Lives Matter, I believe that it's a stepping stone to a greater understanding and a greater identity as a country, that we have a long way to go, but there is hope.
And you brought up a great point. We do want to get to the point that it's not just that Black Lives Matter, but Black lives are thriving. And we spoke about this a little bit in the last panel in reference to business. When we look at Nigerian entrepreneurs and Nigerian businesses, we tend to lend the litmus scale to other cultures and other socioeconomic backgrounds to say, this is where it could be, this is where we want to be. So when we're looking at Black lives mattering, as quite evidently they do you also see that there is a differentiator in between Black lives mattering, but also Black lives also thriving?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Adaobi.
No, I think underscore what Ify and Sam said about not only Black Lives Mattering in the sense of our ability to navigate space freely and openly, but in addition, our visions mattering, right? And what does it mean for our visions to matter? You know, I think to what Sam was saying, Black Lives Mattering is really just about existing in space without the threat of being attacked, or without the threat to your livelihood, and just being able to navigate and access space, to have proper housing, to have access to food, to have access to the daily needs that you need just to live your life. But when we're talking about thriving, I think about visioning, right? And what are our visions for ourselves, for our communities, for our families, for our lives? And that translates to me from a business standpoint and other standpoints, what resources let us have equal access to the same resources that white communities have for their own visions, whether we're talking about access to capital, whether we're talking about access to land, whether we're talking about access to opportunities and networks that allow us to establish and thrive. I was, for my organization, we were working on getting a loan to do some work, and I was working with the bank that, you know, positioned themselves as a community bank, and they really was happy about how they've eliminated bias in their processes, and that they look at all applications the same. And I was talking to the VP of business development, and I said, look, there's been communities that have been systematically oppressed in this particular financial industry. So to look at applicants all the same is to do nothing but exacerbate that existing disparity. So when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Thriving, it means that we have to do above and beyond to get for those communities to kind of rewrite the wrongs that's been done in those communities, and allow us to really shape our own world and shape what we see in community, what we want to see in community.
I agree. And to that point, I just want to add this to the pot. Like you said, there are organizations and companies that go through this implicit bias training and this unlearning processes. And it's been quite evident throughout these times too. We see celebrities hire people to teach them history that clearly was erased and part of the erasure in our institutional education. But also to the point, we have this platform, we have UIU, but us as people of color, specifically Igbo people, what can we do? And this is quite a lofty question, but just in simple syntax, what can we do to create these spaces so that we are lending, and we spoke about this in the last panel as well, but we're lending a hand back. We're creating an open door atmosphere in case we want a promotion, in case there's someone in a similar job, in a similar position, in a similar occupational field that we are interested in. And I think if you can speak to this as well, like with Pink Cornrows, how is it that now that we are in this environment that we clearly are being validated by exterior motives, how can we make sure that we as Igbo people also thrive?
Yeah, one of the things that I just wanted to quickly raise, because I do want to tie it to some of the conversations that we are having to hopefully bring full circle. Mm-hmm. We're still talking about equity as people as separate as like thriving in business. And that's mm-hmm. problematic, right? Mm-hmm. At times we have these conversations, and this is not at fault to the structure of this space, but you know, Igbos always have opinions, right? So like we have panels that talk about tech, and then we have panels that talk about business. And then we have kind of like this, the civil and the human rights panel, right? When the reality is in each of these spaces, there is a civil and human rights consequence as to what it does for us as a people, and they should not be seen as separate, right? So for example, when I think of Black Lives Mattering, and I agree with Sam, the minimum is that we matter, because I want to remind folks that Black lives matter to slave masters. They had to matter because they were getting them their money. So when we talk about Black lives mattering, right, we also have to talk about, are they mattering to us, right? So I don't like having conversations about how some people can make it through Nigeria, whether it's here or whether it's back home, wherever home is, when we know that the majority of women that are from the villages that many of our families are from are living in extremely impoverished conditions in an oil-rich nation. So we also have to ask ourselves, are Black lives able to thrive in Nigeria? And which Black lives are able to thrive? And what do they have to do to be able to thrive? That is an equity question. Because if we're coming year after year after year, talking about only how we give investments, only how some people can make it, only how you graduate from Harvard, those things in themselves are not bad. And I'm saying this as a frustrated 4-degreed Igbo American in America that knows that I'm also not getting paid what I should be getting paid because we haven't tackled this thing called inequity towards women, right? So I want to answer your question about thriving. It's lofty because even as a nation, even as a people, yes, even if your mother was able to survive, did you ever ask your mom, mommy, what is it that you had to go through that maybe Dottie didn't have to go through, just to get a sense of what her struggle is, right? So I just think we have to make sure that thriving is not just about getting rich or having access, that there are inequities even when we have access to those things.
I agree. And to your point specifically, and a lot of people are really resonating with what you're saying, there is classism, of course, sexism riddled in our culture. And from what you're saying, you're speaking eloquently to the point that we speak about success and having certain profitability, but it seems like we're only speaking about certain groups of people. Is that what you're saying as well?
I'm not only certain, I would love for Adaobi and Sam to give their perspective because there's so many layers to this, but it's not just about certain groups of people. I think the beauty of Nigeria is an extremely entrepreneurial place, right? We are hustlers in the positive sense that, like, when we see opportunity, we don't wait for it. What hurts me is that we don't all have the same starting point, that the hustle is different, right? That as much as we talk about the 419s and they are problematic, we don't talk about why 419s need to be 419s. We don't talk about the conditions that have created itself, that people actually, whether it's the folks that look at people that are looting or people that have to send emails that cause for people to have confusion and now are being scammed, that doesn't come from somebody that just has something to do after school and just wants to play games with somebody. That comes from deep generational inequities, right? That forces individuals to put survival before anything else. And to be clear, even Donald Trump is putting survival before anything else. That's why we're here. But we don't look at those that have wealth in the same ways that we look at those that do not. And so I feel like there just needs to be a level setting as to how we talk about culture, we talk about ourselves as a people. When we're out there, we love our green, white, green. But if we don't confront within our own culture what it means to still claim independence, but have your colonizers still taking our resources and only a small amount of us can benefit, then I think the success is not the problem. The pipeline to the success is what we have to evaluate.
Yes, actually, you're speaking on numerous points in which I wish we had more time to even delve and to continue to press on it. Because the pipeline is obviously a weighted system, and I think that's even evident here. And like you said, Donald Trump is very open about the fact that he looks into the survivor mentality, fight or flight. So that being said, there is a pipeline here and even abroad, of course, in terms of how we can achieve said success and what needs to be done, and of course the measures in which each of us take. So that being said,
and to that point, Uju, if I could just quickly comment, I love what Ify was saying, because certain groups of people, white people specifically, are okay if a few Black lives matter, if a few Black lives thrive, if a certain group of Black lives matter or thrive or are successful, right? But it's that idea of that pipeline, like, what are you doing to reach back? And even as a greater society, how are we actually having the whole every Black life matter and thrive? Because even look at from the sports perspective, right? From the NFL perspective, the NFL is 80% Black. And though many NFL players are not millionaires, many NFL players are very, very successful, right? So if you're an athlete, you're almost a Black athlete, you're in a different echelon, you're in a different category. And it's like, okay, it's okay that he's successful or she is successful. I can't even put in she, because I know some WNBA players and they're talking about, man, we make a quarter of as much of the NBA players. So really, if he is successful, that's okay because he's an athlete or he's different, right? I spent some time with some younger kids in the Chicago community, and one of them, a 13-year-old girl named Azaria. She's super intelligent, super bright. And the school she goes to a school on the west side of Chicago. We were talking, and she said, "Man, it's really tough because in class, in school, my friends look at me after tests or when we get our grades back, and they look at me and they say, 'Man, you're white. You're white.'" And she says, "Why is that?" It's because she does so good in school, right? So it's almost this idea that, okay, you're okay to be successful, but you're still not really black, right? You're different. And so how do we go back and we reach back, right? I think it takes two things. I think it takes, number one, the African-Americans, the Nigerians, right, who are successful to find ways to continue to reach back, but it takes you stepping out of your comfort zone. I know even for me as an Igbo, and a lot of us on this Zoom call, we're saying, well, it's a little bit different, and I'm African, I'm not really American, yada yada yada. But I look at this, Heidi Rousseau, a woman named Heidi Rousseau. She's a white woman. She's the mother of Colin Kaepernick. So Colin Kaepernick, this man that took a knee in 2016 to protest social injustice, that now has started this huge movement of change, his mom is white. And so to think of even us as Igbos to say, well, I don't really resonate as much. No, we actually have to. We are called to. This is the time for us to come in, step in, and use our brains, use our resources, use our hearts to go back, step in, and make change. But it can't just be us. It has to be us pulling the rope and bringing everyone else with us.
I agree. And to your point, especially in the athletic perspective, and some of you who may be following the sports leagues right now, specifically, I know we talked about previously about where we can funnel our young men and young women of color to kind of present a better future in terms of where we are allocating our talents and our time and, of course, our funds. But to your point, I just want to add, before getting Adobe's perspective, there are often times, whether we realize it subconsciously, whether we allow ourselves to be in a situation, that we accept some of these inequities and tolerate it because we feel fortunate enough to be in that space, to be in that room, to be in that realm. And we see that more often than not with athletes. And I don't know if this happened previously, but I know before when we had our town halls, I don't know if The Last Dance already came out, but a lot of people are comparing what Michael Jordan was doing in that time when he didn't speak out to now when players like LeBron and, of course, Kaepernick and even Chris Paul and those other players who now feel like they have the space, they have the power, they have the opportunity, even Kyrie, to now say that, okay, we're not just players. We're not just a pawn in your money-making capitalism, but we also have the right to speak out on these injustices because we make up a majority, not even like the entire 95% of these athletic associations. So we don't only have the opportunity, we have the leverage to do so. So that's an excellent point. So Adobe, would you like to add your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just want to underscore something Ify said about Black Lives Mattering, all Black Lives Mattering, right? In that aspect of, and within the Nigerian context, in our communities, patriarchy is a hell of a drug, and patriarchy is deep and patriarchy by itself, the nature of patriarchy is not necessarily bad, but toxic, like the way we practice it and how it's oppressing women in our communities is something, if he said something that really sat with me, and it's something that I have actually spent a lot of time uncovering with my own mother and asking her what were her visions for herself, what were the dreams that she had, right? Because during her period, your visions were aligned with the person you married. That's how you moved around. And your visions, in fact, you didn't even necessarily get to practice or see your own visions. Your visions was centered based on whatever that man's vision was for yourself, and that's how you navigated space. But what were your own visions, and how do we as a community create space for all of our visions to be and exist, and be able to thrive and see things happen without the negative consequence that comes with that, right? Without, this one she don't read too much book, and she's not, ready for marriage. She's not the marriage type, right? There's this consequence that comes with being super educated. You can have all your 4 degrees, but at the end of the day, my child, when will you get married? You know, when will you go out and do this, right? You can't be moving all this in community. That is fantastic. But when will you give us grandkids, right? Everything is centered back on this patriarchal system that really doesn't allow our visions to thrive, right? And so we as a community, particularly this generation, have to shift that, right? We have to create space for the visions of women to thrive, for the visions of men to thrive. And it doesn't mean you lose something by us gaining, right? It doesn't mean that at all. We can all exist in this space. And I just think that when we talk about all Black Lives Mattering, particularly in a Nigerian context, in the Igbo context, that's something, patriarchy is what grabs a hold in our space.
To that point, I think we spoke about this briefly last time. We kind of are in a situation now that we see a lot of our parents, a lot of our elders taking on new hobbies, not really having the full grasp of the same imagination, same vision that we have. And like you said, there wasn't always the opportunity to have vision, to venture on your own interest, to venture on your own enterprising interest. So it is now up for us to really look into how do we actualize our visions? How do we even set visions? And I think Ify mentioned as well, as a part of it is going back and having these conversations with those before us to say, how were things before? How in your eyes are things now, and where can we improve upon that? So that being said, we do have a question that was in the comments from a participant, Eric Hall.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know I was gonna be
Good
on.
to see you again. I remember from the town hall. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well too. There's two things going on. So you have Black Lives Matter, the organization, and then some people, they have some different things on their website. So you can check it out and make of it what you will. And then you have some of the conversations that we are having here, but it's totally different than what we're seeing, what they say on the website. So do you differentiate the two? Or how do you feel about that? If you do or do not differentiate that?
Yeah, I'll start by just saying that first of all movements aren't the same, right? But they're aligned. I was on the ground in Ferguson. I was supporting in Baltimore. The way that we show up, and I think my computer is actually slowing up. But the way I think we all show up in those spaces are very different. Sorry, my computer is acting. Let me know if you all can hear me.
We can hear you. It's just kind of every other.
Got it.
Yeah.
Sorry. There we go. What I was just trying to say is that movement work is not easy. I'll just say that as somebody who is both close and in a lot of ways inspired and at times not close, which is fine, with those that have created this platform that's called Movement for Black Lives, and just seeing the different iterations that it has gone through. I want to remind people that whether we are talking about Fred Hampton, whether we are talking about Diane Nash, whether we are talking about Martin Luther King, whether we're talking about the entire Black Panthers movement, whether we're talking about the Biafran War, that it is young people that are here shaping and doing the work of entire communities and entire people in real time, as taking care of their children and taking care of their loved ones, and trying to work and trying to be sane if that's possible. And so the website that is there, I don't necessarily personally look at if I am aligned with even everything that everyone is saying in these chats or on the website. I do think that they are trying to continue to perfect and do one thing that I'm very connected to, both as an attorney and somebody who's invested in policy, is how do we attack those laws, those things that are in the books and the practices that are being implemented on our lives. And we've mentioned in other town halls that Nigerians have also been killed, right, by police here in the United States. So, you know, a bullet or discrimination does not care if your first name is Rahim or Nkechi. That there is a strong both political movement that is more recent, right, in looking at how do we elect the right people that can actually advance the policies on a local and national level. But then also with this larger defunding the police, which looks very differently there. And I would love for Adaobi to even share what they've done in the Midwest. But I'm here in New York City, and I will tell you right now, we were close. We were close in many ways. But as Frederick Douglass has mentioned, power concedes nothing without a struggle, right? So whether it's on the website or whether it's in the streets, there will always be critics about the people that are trying to advance liberation for everyone. And it will never be perfect. What I think is more of a constructive means of my time, especially with UIU, is what is our action collectively in the movement, right? To watch what other people are doing and not necessarily have our own call to action collectively as to what is our contribution, what are we doing on our website, what are we doing in our spaces, and not as charity, but as people who could also be impacted negatively by these systems. Then we also need to have our own call to action as it relates to Black lives. And when we get to the what can we do next, I'll just front load it now. I want us to start creatively being intentional about what is our political and social political action here and abroad with the network that we have of Igbos. We are all in different places doing amazing things, but what does it mean for Adaobi, Uju, Sam, Ify, and all the people here to do our stuff in alignment with the movement, right? Recognizing that there are enough critics out there, especially white people, but also traditional Black people that are gonna criticize everything that we do. But what are we doing to ensure that we're in alignment with making sure that all Black lives matter? And especially since we know we have a greater commitment in the villages that we're from, that the gender-based violence that's happening in Nigeria has to be more than just women marching. It has to be something that really has us protecting cousins of mine that have told me that getting into a cab, if they don't go with somebody, could be the day that they get raped. Like, we have to take those things seriously and not look at, we don't have time to be critical. Some shit, excuse my language, some things are gonna be right on point and some things we're not gonna agree with, but they killing us. So what we gonna do, right? Like, so I think we have to, I don't think that that was the intention of your question, but I get asked this question a lot because I feel like people try to have gotcha moments to get Black people to pit against each other. And I'm not going to invest in that conversation. I think the conversation needs to be, what are we doing with the energy that we have, with the expertise that we have, so that when somebody asks an Igbo woman or an Igbo man, what did you do for Black lives? We are clear about it. And we don't get seen as people that are just waiting for other people to liberate us or people that don't care.
Girl, yes.
Yes. That was everything. Okay.
No, I need Sam and Adobo. No, I need to hear them now. Come on, please, people. We waited all day for this conversation.
I mean, you touched on so much, and we still have so much to get into. But yeah, you hit a lot of the major points, especially.
Yeah, I think for me, and if you hit on it a little bit, the point of, I think a lot of times people would like to waste time, whether intentionally or unintentionally, trying to divide and saying, well, have you looked at the Black Lives Matter website? Or have you looked at the movement for Black lives and the things they're for, if they're for or against? And that's why even when I get asked a question like that, I go back to, okay, what am I actually doing? Right? Because I could sit here and have a 30-minute, hour-long, 2-hour-long debate. Is the Black Lives Matter movement the specific movement I want to move with, or do I want to not stand or not take a knee or even wear a shirt for the Black Lives Matter movement? But specifically, before even asking that question, my question is this: do Black lives really matter? Period. At the end of the day, do they? And if they do, what will you do about it? And so for some people, it is wearing a t-shirt. Right? We see a lot of NFL, MLB, and even now NBA players wearing t-shirts and putting names on the back of their jerseys, which is a way to make change. Another way to make change is to go into protests. Another way is to go and change policies. Another way is to actually go and I was meeting with the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, and he talked about the inside game. He said, and it's a Black man who is from Dallas and a black man, and now he's the superintendent. He's trying to change the racist policies of the police from the inside out. That's one way to make change. Another way is like what I do oftentimes, and I even talk about this in my book a little bit, is actually try and bring people together, right? So there's conversations about defunding the police, and that is a way. But the other conversations about what if we had peace circles, sitting circles, healing circles, listening circles with the police. That's what I've been doing in Chicago the last couple of years, sitting down with police officers, with some of the youth, and saying, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's come to the table. We've even spent time with some of the rival gang leaders trying to collaborate what people call peace treaties with the people who are on the ground doing the shooting and the killing and the murders, right? And so how do you actually use what you have to make the change? Instead of just having conversations and having banter and back and forth about if something completely aligns. There's so much as a team, and I keep on going back to sport because that's part of what I do, but as a team, if you're on a team, you're not going to 100% align or agree with every single thing that your coach says. At the end of the day, you're not going to agree with every single technique or every single opinion or every single play that he draws up. But if you're on the team, you need to run the play to be successful. And so our job is that if we're on the team of understanding that, yes, Black lives do matter, then what play do we need to run? Right? If you talked about it earlier, let's all get on the same united front. Let's all get on the same team, right? That's step one. But step two is, okay, what play do we need to run, right? I know me, I haven't been in policy or in law, right? But I love people. So I love getting together with people, right? Communicating with Roger Goodell from the NFL. We're trying to get him to get on board with helping Black lives. Communicating with the mayor, the different mayors and politicians, right? As an athlete, I have that platform, right? We all have our different platforms and all have our different gifts and abilities that we've been uniquely given. And I think when we use those gifts, not only do they bring glory to God, but they also benefit the people around us in the world at large. And so I think it's time for us all to bring our gifts to bear.
Amen. And we brought it full circle a little bit last time, just to add to your point about dividing. It's the enemy who really wants to divide, but it's God's opportunity to unite us. And like Ify said in the previous town halls, we all have gifts. She mentioned starting a database of all these gifts, and the gifts we have are each chosen out of a litany of gifts that God, but they're all meant to be utilized to give a return of investment to Christ. And like you said, Ify, and of course Sam, the reason why the campaign was started, the reason why we started What We Can Do, is so that we're not idle. We're not idle in the digital advocacy of posting and getting off. And I was even talking earlier about how quick our news cycle is now. Whether we're learning about pop culture, we're learning about, what Kanye is doing in his campaign, we're learning about, TikTok being banned. The news cycle is so quick now that we turn focus into the next thing and we forget that, okay, there still wasn't justice for Brown and Taylor. There's still not justice for this. There still isn't this happening, that we become complacent. We become complacent in the digital advocacy to be like, okay, I posted on Black App Tuesday, which Ify said it was a mess. We posted on Black App Tuesday, but hey, listen, I don't blame you. But we posted on this day, but now the conversation is over. Or, okay, I said my public apology about how I misspoke and how what I said was ignorant. Now the work is over. And we are here today to really put tangible action items that can be pragmatic towards us actualizing it as an organization. And not just saying, oh, I tuned into the conversation or I participated, but also having the dividends to say, okay, I left my stamp on history. Within this time, I did that. Within this time, we came together to make this action item to produce this. So that is the biggest emphasis I want to leave. So we're not idle and complacent in the fact that we feel content with just having remedial posts and conversations here and there to show that we're woke, but really, where is the actual activism in those actions?
And Uju, if I can just comment quickly, I would so much rather be on the field playing the game than on the sidelines watching. And I think about this, and yes, in sport, people get paid a lot of money to commentate about a player in a game. But at the end of the day, imagine if people were coming to us and saying, man, these UIU, this town halls, UIU, what are they even doing? Are they really aligned with trying to help people? And man, and then now all of a sudden, instead of Ify using her talents and her smarts, and instead of you doing your thing, and instead of us doing our things, we're having conversations and trying to lose trust, right? You think the way that movements move forward is by trust, right? People talk about money and finances and policy. All those things are great, right? All those things are all positive. But without an undergirding and an underbelly of trust, you cannot move from point A to point B. And so all that the conversation around is a Black Lives Matter movement, the right movement to follow, and it, you know, all this and all that, like it's all trying to dissolve trust. And what happens when trust is dissolved is that there's no area to move forward. And so what I would say is this: I would say no one's going to love what you do. There's always going to be critics. There are always going to be people who disagree. Look at Dr. King, right? Dr. King, he wasn't getting lauded or applauded in 1968, 69. He was getting murdered. He was getting assassinated, right? And now all of a sudden there's streets named after him and there's holidays, etc. But when he was doing the work that needed to be done, he was actually being killed because of it, right? He got murdered because of it. And go back all the way back, right, to Jesus, right? Jesus was not this, no one said, oh, you're this hero. He died on a cross, right? He was crucify him. And so if people are telling you, or even trying to distract or detract from what you're doing, move forward. Move forward. Don't be discouraged, because know that you cannot make any progress without opposition, right? It's like any people talk about, oh, I don't like change. No, we all love change, right? If you just think about that, we all want to go from point A to point B. Man, I want to lose weight. I want to get in better shape. I want to get this degree, right? But it's that transition period that's tough. It's like labor pains. That's the hard part. But we all want to get to that point of change. And so what we're feeling right now with the questions of man, is the Black Lives Matter movement really helping? And man, are you really doing anything? That's all just those are the labor pains, right? That's transition, which means that you're actually going somewhere. There's fruit that is soon to be produced.
And let me just add very quickly that while I do think that there's, to be clear, I am a principled person. I do think that there are ways that you can gauge whether or not something, even when there's a protest or whatever, like safety matters, right? Like there are things where you should always be gauging, like the teachings that you know from your creator, from your people, like there's that conversation, right? Then to Sam's point, there's the public discourse that we really have to be careful as to what happens when my voice and why am I being used to be asked this question. Is it possible that you are trying to get another Black face to condemn another Black face in public, right? Because white people don't really need our approval to oppress us. If they want to oppress us, and when I say white people, I mean whiteness as a system, not white individuals, right? But I think the issue that I have is we are living in a nation right now, and I don't know people's political affiliations, but this, outside of political affiliation, we are living in cities and towns and in a nation where we don't talk about, well, do you trust that policy from that person? Or do you trust what Trump is doing? When Black people decide that liberation is on the table, then all of a sudden we have a debate about what are the tactics that they're using. When it's on anything else, or when it's any other group of people, we don't even question it, right? So in the work that I do, working with whether it's Fortune 500 companies or in fashion or in sports, I don't just talk about the things that are visible, the overt racism. I talk about the things that we don't question ever, and we take it as is. Right? So a lot of what happens in our systems is that we actually don't question. Why is it that nobody has done anything about microaggressions in the workplace? Why is it that nobody has done anything about the fact that we know that Black women going into our hospitals have a higher chance, 8 times higher, of dying in the hospital, but nothing has changed? We don't question it. Because technically, if people asked us whether or not we trust those hospitals, the answer should be no. But we don't ask those questions, right? So part of this is an exercise in, if we're going to ask questions, are we asking the right questions? And just to affirm what Sam had raised, let's not get in the trap of like feeling like we need to even be perfect, because that also is not the calling of a social justice liberator. We don't have to be perfect, but we do need to progress, and we do need to fail forward, as they say, right? So I just want us to, if we're going to do the equity mindset, I want us to recognize that if we're going to ask questions, the question should be of the systems and what do we need to improve ourselves to dismantle it. The question should not be always about our people, because there are enough people that will do that for us. We don't need to be the ones to do it.
Right. And I want to add, just kind of underscore something Ify said earlier about, that quote from Frederick Douglass about power concedes nothing without demand, right? So our focus should be on demand, right? And elevating demand. What this time has done, we talk about a critical mass, there's an interrogation around that for me personally, because what I really have seen happen is the collective consciousness of people get raised, right? Black, brown folks, and whiteness. But the thing about whiteness is, and because of our current news cycle, like the thing about whiteness is the collective consciousness of whiteness is raised only temporarily because it's fueled by the death of Black and brown bodies, right? And we can't not allow the death of Black and brown bodies to fuel demand. We got to consistently put demand within whatever the spaces we operate in, whether it's in the financial industry, whether we're operating in public policy, whether we're operating in the public sector or nonprofit sector or corporate sector, right? We always have to think about demand and how can we increase demand within the spaces that we are having and not get involved again into that divide and conquer. What's happening here in Minneapolis? So right now we had an effort to try to remove, to defund the police by removing a particular clause in our charter, right? There was a clause in the charter that allocates, and it's a policy issue, that allocates a certain percentage of funding to police. And what folks are trying to do was get that particular clause removed because policy issues should not be included in the charter because policy changes. Our societies and change regularly. So as a result, we create policies to respond to that change. So a policy amendment should be included in a public charter when everything around that charter is constantly changing. So there was a vote to try to get that, to try to get the charter itself put on the ballot in November so that the community could vote. And this charter commission decided that they would maintain power in holding, in deciding what changes can happen with the charter versus giving it to the community to kind of decide on what should happen with the charter. But in that conversation, there was different all black communities really having different conversations about defunding the police, right? There was folks that were really concerned about not wanting to do defunding, particularly because we just had our first African-American police chief, and the conversation then became, with this first African-American police chief, let's see if we can, let's give this brother the opportunity to try to dismantle or reform the space, right? And then there was another group of folks that were really talking about, it doesn't matter who's leading that work, like this is a systems issue, not an individual person issue, right? And we got so caught up in that particular battle and not really aligning ourselves and saying, okay, what we can all agree on is that the current system doesn't work, right? And so maybe, is there a room in the conversation where we look at reshaping or deconstructing or bringing down the current system in a way that will move all of us forward, right? Because then what was happening was this divide, divide happening amongst opinions. And so when the charter commission decided not to put it on the ballot in November, now like it just seems like the energy has left the room. Mm-hmm. When in actuality the work still hasn't. The work is just beginning, right? We need to put more focus on demand, and so the more that we can advocate and put attention on the demand that we need to actually get power to concede, the more we'll be able to like make some real movement in the space.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I do want to chime in onto what Ify mentioned earlier in terms of us doing ourselves a disservice and us basically shooting ourselves in the foot by being afraid and playing it safe. And one of the biggest ways we do that, in which she said, is we often are afraid to fall forward and to fail forward. And with that, there are a lot of times we see investors and specifically non-people of color go into investments like the Fire Festival, for example. And the young man that started that actually started a new organization, a new project, and was funded with about 7 investors upon failing forward with that festival. And I use that as an example because often we as people of color shoot ourselves in the foot basically by saying, okay, this already exists, or okay, this is already happening. And albeit we should come together as a collective voice, there is a lot of opportunities that we miss out on that could advance us as a people that we literally let happen in the back burner because we are afraid to fail forward. So
And
that
I'm
being,
gonna, but I just want to say this, and maybe just because I do this work, and I know it's not because of you, Uju, but I'm gonna tell you right now, my ear itches when we say people of color,
Mhm.
and we mean Black, right? Black people have a different reality in this country,
Mhm.
and Black people have a different reality globally. That it's convenient now to talk about people of color to erase the complicity of England as the queendom of white supremacy and all the other boats and ships that came from that area and terrorized other places, right? I like that somebody here said, please talk about Blacks who used to vote Republican. That in itself is a deep, 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 deep conversation, because that has to do with the party systems being completely different than what they are now. But what is important for us to recognize is that no other people of color were ever made less than a human being. They were still treated as less than a human being. And you will find even within the Constitution that the way that Native communities were talked about is inhumane, it's subhuman, it's subpar. There is still a difference, and not a better or worse difference, but there is something different when you have a case like Dred Scott that says anyone that has a drop of blood is not a citizen of the United States. And we are still trying to fight to get to a place that we've never been on this soil. But I would argue and say that even the Nigerian independence did not get rid of England, right? So I want us to be clear. Every space, in India, it's the caste system, right? Every space has their thing, but there is something unique about Blackness. And I also am an advocate of indigenous communities, Latinx communities, every indigenous group of individuals. We get lazy when we say people of color, because it erases the different struggles that we actually need to embark on to get to equity, if equity is the goal. So when I think of Fire Festival, for example, the reason why why he was able to get that money had nothing to do with the fact that he was white and male. And we don't have to make it complicated, and we don't have to make it a secret. And to your further point, he was also found to have been, he was already found to be a crook. But that tells you how invested this system is in amplifying and elevating whiteness, regardless of your credentials, regardless of whether you're obeying the law or not, right? So even as Sam is talking about what's going on the field and all the work that he is doing, not necessarily getting paid for, but doing it because it's the right thing to do, we need to really think about that. Right? We need to really think about what it means to be on the side of being oppressed, and also being the people that have to liberate us, right? So that's why I feel like if we don't have these equity conversations, we miss a lot of our suffrage. We miss the stories of how we got to this place. And then even when we think we're fixing something, and in Nigeria, it's very much focused on economics. And I don't have a problem with economics. Economics makes sense, but we also don't talk about climate injustice. If we don't fix the climate in Lagos, Lagos is going to be underwater. If we don't talk about the oil that's there, kids are going to be dying at a greater rate, and we're going to have deformities that come up. So we have to have a deeper conversation about what the problem is, because our solutions may look like solutions, but we can be erasing ourselves without even knowing that we're erasing ourselves, right? And that's why this is not an easy thing. This is not for, it's, to be honest with you, Sam was talking about he would rather be playing. I'd rather just be sipping coffee right now and not necessarily have to be fighting for my life. I can be a bougie chick. I like nice things. I want to be relaxed and free. I don't want wrinkles because I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to get my check or not. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. But I also realize that if I invest only in my individual success, nobody actually gets uplifted. And corporate America, capitalism, has never had the antidote to get all of us to at least have a fair chance, you know? So I feel like it's a struggle. Nigerians have to make a choice. And it's not an easy choice, but we do have to make a choice about what are we going to do with our resources. Because the one thing about us, at least here as first gen and even second gen individuals, we have resources to invest in both the movement here and in our movements back home. The question is, are we disciplined enough to be organized around that? And I think that that's hard to do when there's so many people, but I do think we have to move our spaces beyond having just conversations about this into, and you know, Uju, I said this last time, the next time I want us to speak, it should be an update about what we've done with our resources to ensure that several different movements have resources, have connections, have the skills that we have to help at least do our part. We're not going to fix it all, but I just think we can be doing more. And the first starts with making sure that our language is not erasing people.
I agree. I 100% agree. Definitely the respect needs to be there to say not just people of color, of course, but when we are specifically having this conversation, we can't always be PC. We're not pink cornrows. We can't always be politically correct and use the umbrella statement of
They'll be fine. We need to take care of Black lives, and we don't need, we need to be okay with that. They'll be all right.
Yes. And you brought up a great point, because again, I do want to ask you to, and I kind of want to transition into this. Of course, what are the action items? But like you said, we cannot play it safe, because I say this all the time. It's not about us personally. It's about our community. It's about those in our greater well-being, and of course, those who are coming after us. So in that same light, between you and Sam, and I want you to specifically answer this, what do you believe are some action items us as Igbo people and those on the call can specifically make in towards moving in that direction and not living in complicity, basically?
I'm only going to say one thing, because I need this to happen. And I think I said this last time. I really need us to have a real conversation about sexuality and gender. And I say that not because we're all going to agree. I think it's the hardest conversation. I see somebody already said bye. Right. It's the hardest conversation to talk about. I love what Adaobi said, which is it's about which Black lives matter, right? Do all Black lives matter? Sam asked that question. Do all Black lives matter? It's a question. And I do think we have to figure out if we are bold enough to have that conversation, irrespective of our relationship to our God, irrespective to what we have been taught about Jesus the Christ, irrespective to what we've been taught about Christianity. That does not mean we become the Antichrist. What that means is, are we able to say that even if I don't like you, or even if I don't rock with you, I don't think you should be killed. I don't think you should be denied a job. I don't think you should be profiled and targeted. And I don't think you should be arrested because you live a different way than I live. I may talk about you, I'll go get some drinks with my other bougie friends and we could talk about how we don't like you. But can we at least invest in the conversation? And the reason why this is important, women are severely being left behind at home and here, and our struggle has not necessarily elevated just because we're here in the United States. That's all I was, I do think that we have to create forums, and it's not gonna be easy. All I'm saying is, as far as an action item, I would love for us to really invest in what it looks like to have a space to debate, because we love to debate, but to debate it, and with the end result of, we wanna create a process where literally all Black lives do matter. But if we have to have these conversations, and that especially means, how do we treat women? Can we honestly say that women are treated fairly? Because I think that's a more easier entry point. But I do think we have to broaden to how people live their lives differently, and what that means as far as our responsibility, especially around safety, right? We can have conversations around other things, but when it comes to safety, I do think that we need to think about what gender-based violence priority, especially at home, looks like. So that is just one action item. I don't know what the solution is, as much as it's an action. It's a call to action that I would like for us to see.
Sam, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, one thing I would say, and even in regards to two things, having the conversations, right? I think there's a verse in Proverbs 31 that talks about speaking up, right? It says, speak up for those people who can't speak up for themselves. A lot of us on the call have mentioned this, right? Ify, Adaobi, you've mentioned this, Uju as well. We have a platform. We've been advanced enough, whether it's we're in America and we're not in Nigeria, and we have a little bit more success or money or whatever. We have a platform, we have a voice. So I think the first thing we need to do is to use our voice to speak up when we see injustice, right? Instead of turning a blind eye, whether it's within our own family conversations that we hear our parents have about Black Americans or whatever, right? Speaking up and being bold enough to say, you know what? I know they may think that way, but I don't need to think that way. right? Even when it comes to Christianity, right? I know if you were talking about this, right? People, you know, Christianity has been politicized in a lot of ways, but if you actually go back and actually like look at who Jesus was, right? I think about the woman at the well, right? There's a story of Jesus with this woman at the well, and you know, it's like, well, you know, where's your husband? It's like, yeah, I see you've got 7 husbands, right? But Jesus didn't look and say, well, and so get out of here, and I'm not talking to you. Like, in fact, the disciples were looking at him like, why are you talking to this woman? He's like, no, because she's one of mine, right? We are one and the same, right? I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna, you know, I'll give you living water, right? There's a story about a prostitute, right? And everyone's getting ready to throw stones. And Jesus looks and he says, let he who was without sin cast the first stone. And as you see, one by one from oldest to youngest, they all dropped their stones and walked away. And people usually stop at the end of that story. They say, okay, great, good, haha, great story, you know, stones are dropped. But what happens after that, people don't remember, is that Jesus goes to that woman and he bends down, looks at her, right? And it's talking about this issue of like, of even specifically Christianity, right? Or even American Christianity, and some could even talk of Nigerian Christianity and what that means and how do you navigate and have these uncomfortable conversations. Jesus goes to that woman. He says, hey, where have your accusers gone? She looks left, looks right, doesn't see anybody. And he says, neither do I accuse you. Now go and sin no more. And so even specifically with the example of all Black Lives Matter, right? Whether, no matter what gender or sexual orientation or whatever, right? No one deserves to die or to be oppressed, right? Or better yet, not to be killed, right? And so I would even argue that even as Christians, we need to change our vantage point. There's a book by a guy named Howard Thurman called Jesus and the Disinherited. And it's a book that Martin Luther King was often thought that he actually would walk around with, this book and the Bible. Those were the 2 books he walked around with in his briefcase. In that book, it talks about Jesus stood for people who had their backs against the wall. It didn't say if they were Black, if they were white, if they were gay, if they were straight, if they were poor, if they were rich. It talks about people with their backs against the wall. And if you look all throughout Scripture, right, not American Christianity, because American Christianity has really sat on their hands during this whole process. It's part of the reason why we're even here, right? There's stories, I'm sure everyone knows the stories of back in during slavery when they would pause church so some of the members could go do a lynching. Right? Let's pause, go do your lynching and come back, right? So that's American Christianity. And so, but if you look all throughout Scripture, Jesus stood for people with their backs against the wall. And so I think the first conversation is saying, okay, who has their backs against the wall, right? So if it's Black people, Black lives, let's stand up for them. Let's speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. The Bible says, speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. There are no qualifiers, right? The only qualifiers are poor and needy. Right? Poor and needy, right? What is true religion? The Bible also says, right? I know I'm preaching now, but right? True and undefiled religion is this. It's taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, the widows and the orphans, right? Jesus consistently goes to the most marginalized groups, right? So as far as me, right? If I talk about it in my bio, follower of Jesus, right? Who do I need to be running to? Like me, you, everyone on this call, right? No matter who you believe in, right? No matter what God you believe in, you need to be running to the most marginalized groups. I run a nonprofit called Athletes for Justice. We unite all the professional athletes and collegiate athletes and everyday athletes and weekend warriors around justice causes in their communities. And one of the teams we're partnering with, it's a WNBA team, and 80% Black, and many of those women are LGBTQ plus, right? And so, and they wanted to support a nonprofit that supported those causes. Right. And so I'm met with a decision, right? I'm leading this organization, but I'm also a Christian, right? What do I do? What do I say? This makes me look bad. But then I remembered, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Right. So who do I need to be loving? Who do I need to be serving? Who do I need to be taking care of? Right. What would Jesus do? Right. Even when it comes to gender inequality, I know I'm talking for a long time, but just bear with me. Right. As a man, right. I'm a Nigerian man. I'm the first son. Right. There's this deal. Yeah, I got the power, and I got, I'm next in line. Right. And even look at my wife, right? And think about, like, you should be serving me and doing this and doing that. And I talked to a friend, really good friend of mine, and I'm talking about, like, that's the common thought, right? You should, serve and this and that. One of my friends, a friend of mine, we were talking, he's he makes music, right? He's a rapper. And I was having a little bit of a problem because I said, man, society is telling me to treat my wife one way, but Jesus tells me something totally different. So who do I listen to? Right? Because everyone else is saying do that. And so anyways, I was met with this decision. He said, dude, how would Jesus be thinking of this conversation with your wife, right? Would he be saying, no, you listen to what I have to say and you go where I want you to go? Or would you right the wrongs that maybe our parents have been living in, right? Or their parents, right? I think we have a unique opportunity, and after this, I'm in my seat. I think we have a unique opportunity as a people, as young Nigerian people, to right wrongs that have been okay for a very, very, very long time. And the only question is, will we do what we know we need to do? And I talk about this in my book, right? SamAchoBook.com. You can go pre-order. All my homies go pre-order it. But I talk about this in my book. We need to right wrongs. We cannot sit on the sideline. We can't, right? It's for such a time as this. So that's what I would say. Those are the steps I would say we need to take.
And I want to add to that, we need our Igbo brothers to step up, right? Because in this space, when we're talking about gender inequity, right? I think about, I've had many conversations with my mother, and she has told me many a times how I have saved her in ways that I didn't even think I was doing anything, just by speaking up. Because, you know, as daughters, even as children of our parents, we have a certain privilege and a way that we can speak, that our parents, particularly our fathers, can hear us differently. So I would say something like, "Daddy, why are you doing that to mommy? Why can't mommy have this? Or why can't mommy have that?" And I'm just, as a child, talking because of what I believe is right, not necessarily situated in any particular thing. And my mom would tell me, when you said that, it shifted the conversation and it gave me room to talk, right? And many of our mothers are leaning on our voices so they can have room to move and talk in the relationships that they exist in. But that shouldn't be. So where are our Igbo brothers in that? Like, I need our men to step up and create a different space for us to navigate in, right? Because, which is why oftentimes in our culture, when they say when you give birth to a girl, there's a blessing in that, right? Because of how not only does that woman, does that young girl grow up to end up assisting her mother in labor that she shouldn't be doing by herself, right? But then she also has a different access point to her father, which is her husband, to be able to shift mindsets and heart in a way that gives her more room to move in her marriage. But that shouldn't be. Where are our Igbo men in that? That's not the work of our daughters to do, because we didn't create that space. We didn't create that environment. That's not the work of our daughters to do. That's the work of our brothers to step up and do that.
Yeah, and Adaobi, if I can even touch that though, whether it is or is not your work, I think if the opportunity is there, we should all take advantage of it. And here's what I mean by that. I have a 5-year-old son, and oftentimes I'll do something that I think is right or whatever, and he'll challenge me, "Daddy, why are you doing that? Daddy, why are you being mean? Daddy, why are you not helping me clean up?" Right? And usually I'm like, "Well, no, my dad, I had to do all the work," right? But it's like, "No, Daddy, that's not okay." Right? I have a 5-year-old son. I also have a 3-year-old daughter, and you talked about it, Adaobi. When I had my daughter, it was almost as if a different part of my heart opened up that I did not know existed. She can do no wrong. And so as my child, for her to come and say something to me, it hits me different, right? It hits different. And so the thing about us that we all have, we are all children, right? We are all children, which means we have a specific voice and a specific, almost as if it's like a vernacular or a calling that touches our parents in different ways. And I understand some of us may have lost parents, right? And so I don't want to be insensitive to that. I recently lost a close family member as well. But what I'm saying is this: we all have spaces where our voice can be heard. And so whether it's someone else's job or someone else's responsibility, if they're not doing it, you step up and do it, right? And that's kind of where I'm, and that's not an indictment on anyone, right? It's just this idea of, I want to go into spaces and move the needle on my teams, right? And I was never the captain or very rarely the starter, but I was moving the needle, right? I was leading from behind. That's kind of like the way I operate. I would lead from behind. And so as much people want to have power or influence, right? Leadership is more so what happens when you turn around and you see who's following you. Right, that's what leadership is. And so I don't care if you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're black, if you're white, if you're Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, I don't care. Right, we need to step up and lead. And it doesn't mean giving a speech. It doesn't mean doing this big heroic things. sometimes it's in the little things, right? In those conversations, you know, your mom says, wow, Ada, thank you so much. That was huge for me. That's leadership. That's leadership. Or even you know, in our work field, it's leadership. And so it's not always these big monumental movements. It's the little things, right? Lead in the little things.
And I know some people may have been, Uju, I know you raised this as like, what should we do next, right? But I actually think that what this conversation, at least for me, which gave me beyond life, I mean, pass the plate, share me y'all cash apps. I'm willing to put in. I mean, Sam may not need any of my money, but I'm willing to give you a little bit in the pot.
Go ahead and buy that book. Go ahead and buy that book.
This is a model. Drop it in the chat. Don't be shy. But I do think that this is a model of part of what needs to happen, right? That for those of us who have been on the front lines, if you are only doing, and not thinking that this is part of building, right? That this is also not liberation work, right? One of the things that doesn't get talked about is that in this movement, there's been a lot around art. I love seeing not even just West African art, but art from throughout the diaspora that, if I'm going to be honest with you, even within the diaspora, we don't necessarily know what's going on in Kenya or in Tanzania or in Togo. Like, we are in our tribe and in our space, right? And one of the things that I think, for those that haven't read Octavia Butler, and even for those that are critical of Beyonce's Black is King, which regardless of however you feel about it, the visuals allowed me to feel like, wow, there's a future that actually allows us to maybe possibly come to ourselves as a Black nation that's no longer just one tribe or another tribe, but as a Black nation. And yes, it is within an image that is subjective through somebody else's visuals of who we are. But to what Adobe was saying earlier, dreaming and visioning, right? That has been also cut out. When you make somebody 3/5 of a human being, you tell them that you don't think differently than a cow. You don't think differently than a chair. You don't have a mind. So we cannot limit the fact that when we have moments like this as cultural beings to talk about our culture, to talk about our challenges, that is also fighting against oppression and suppression, right? That sometimes we can get so much in the protesting and so much in the doing that what they also don't want us to do is rest and enjoy each other and have joy and talk about what it means to be Ada, or talk about what it means to have your child, or talk about the lessons that for some of you, may they rest in peace, who lost parents, just to think about the things that they imparted on you or the conversations that you wish you had. That then needs to inspire us as to who is not able, like Sam said, who is on the margins that is not able to dream, that is not able to have a vision without stress. And how can I fight for them and make sure that they are able to have these conversations and that they are able to enjoy joy in this way, right? So I just leave that, I'll leave that with us, like, as a hopefully for those that are like, I don't really get why we're having these conversations. We just rapped with each other and had joy and peace. And I think that that's something that, to be honest with you, is very rare when you're doing this work, or even when you're doing anti-racist conversations or equity conversations with firms. They want us to labor and pour and give them solutions. We have to find moments of like this to talk about where we're centered and how we prioritize our liberation. And that also comes with asking ourselves the hard things about our culture, but also seeing the joy of being Igbo, of being Nigerian, and of being Black. And then none of them are separate.
I agree. And I would like us to echo something that I think was the running theme as to what each of you said. It was bringing these conversations home. So not just having your laptop on right now in the background and your parents in the background or your siblings in the background, but genuinely feeling fearless and releasing your inhibitions to be like, okay, this might not be a perspective that my parents acknowledge or respect, but I can still be respectful in how I present it, but also mature enough to start this dialogue, to initiate this type of conversation that may not necessarily shift their way of thinking, but increase and expand their paradigm. So when you do feel comfortable and mature enough to present those thoughts, that's really the only way that conversations can shift and begin. Because when you have a childlike adolescence, as the Bible tells us, and it reminds us, the only way to be completely and wholeheartedly in trust of Christ is to have that childlike jubilance and that wonder to say, like, okay, I can put my trust in this. So children often, or younger people typically, make those comments like Sam said, like, oh, why are you doing this to mommy? Or like, oh, why are you being mean, and things of that nature, to feel jubilant enough to say, okay, I'm comfortable enough to start this dialogue. But to your point, Adaobi, I've had similar experiences where my mother was just telling me like, oh, when I was young, I used to cry all the time. I never spoke up. But when I see you, like, I don't know where you got this independence and confidence to speak your mind, because I was never that way. And when you speak in a way that is true to your character, and of course, eloquent enough to not only be respected, but to express your thoughts, it not only encourages those around you, but it does encourage your parents and those above you who may not have felt comfortable in that time to speak out on different issues, but could be reflective upon what you're doing and feel encouraged by that. So again, like we said before, it's not just about us in terms of the play and the struggles and everything we're working towards, but also initiating dialogue and just changing, especially the normatives surrounding gender and different types of, and I do want to add to like the propaganda that happens, of course, with the news itself, but having the dialogue from this internal perspective within the home, so we're not just leaving the conversations where they are. So do y'all have anything to add to that in terms of releasing your inhibitions enough to have these conversations at home, and what that may have been like for you to start having these types of conversations?
Oh, one thing I would say, authenticity is disarming. Being real and not pretending is rare. And so the more you can be real about some of your hurts and some of your pains and even some of your insecurities, the more it'll stand out, number one. But number two, the more disarming it'll be when you have these uncomfortable and difficult conversations. So many people are ready to fight, right? People talk about fight or flight. I'm ready either to fight or to run away. But what if, right? What if, as Uju just said, we approach conversations, we approach people with that childlike adolescence, that childlike wonder of like, well, maybe I can change the way my parents think, right? Or maybe I can change the way some of these systems operate. Or maybe I'll just have a conversation, man, what you said last week, last year, last month, it really hurt me. And someone said, well, you still think about that? Yeah, I mean, it really, I didn't like what you did there. And you almost leave that person with the choice, right? Are you gonna go and now I'm gonna smash you and make you feel even worse? Or I look at you, if you have this difficult conversation, or you open yourself up, or you be real, right? How to be real in a world full of fakes, right? You be real when everyone else is pretending, and all of a sudden you free them up to say, you know what, like, I've had some hurts from my past, and the reason I said this or did this or act this way is because of this or because of that. And so what I'm saying is that I believe that, here's what I believe. I believe that, like, when you're you, I think that God gets the glory. I think the people around you benefit, and I think the world around you thrives when you're you. But when you hide, when you pretend, when you bottle it up, when you shut down, no one benefits. No one benefits. You feel worse, right? Even as I say it, I feel in my heart that, oh, that's shutting down. You feel horrible, right? And people around you, they don't know where you're coming from, right? So it's like my advice to everyone going through whatever you're going through, even if you're trying to make a change, right? Let it out, right? And what is it? Let the real you out. That little, we all have a little kid inside of us, right? Let that kid out to the world. And yes, it can be a little bit dangerous. Yes, it can be a little bit frightening. But when you let that person out to the world, you will disarm people in ways they didn't know they could be disarmed. You will change people, and they will come back and say, wow, I really respect what you did and what you said. And, oh, that fear that you were thinking of, right? Because we all have these fears. Oh, what's going to happen? Like, really, like, if we go down the path of what is the worst thing that can happen? If I say something to my dad, right? And what is the worst thing that can happen? Right? You just go down there. Okay, maybe he'll yell. Maybe he'll be mad or whatever, right? If I say something to my boss, what is the worst thing that can happen? Right? And if you really go down that evaluation cycle, the worst thing oftentimes isn't that bad. Right? So I'll end with this. Don't fear fear. Right? Don't fear fear. Step into it. Step into it, but step into it with a childlike heart.
Amen. And one thing I do want to add to that too is, what's the worst thing that can happen? And usually what we're so fearful of is an uncomfortable conversation, whether it is we're expressing our feelings in a way that most people are not accustomed to, or we're having a conversation that's not welcome to an unwelcomed ear. And, you know, personal experience, I think it was Ify Adaobi mentioned it earlier in terms of the different societal pressures. I think I was in high school and I came out with my first website, and I was just put it on the front page like I'm a feminist. And the first thing my father asked me at dinner in front of my entire family was, so you're a feminist, does that mean you're also a lesbian? And he was just so taken aback by, like, how can you be this? How can you say this? Like, how will you get married? How will people approach you? How will men look at you? And then the thing is, when, like you said, you're living in your purpose and you're really working with your gifts and what God is doing to work towards you, when you really put it out there, what's the worst thing that could happen? A conversation. You won't be in a situation that is as detrimental, because ultimately when you do go out on God's will and God puts you in a place, he will provide you with provisions. He'll provide you with everything you need.
Well, no, he will provide for every vision. There is definitely provision. You will go through some stuff though. I don't know.
100%. As Apostle Paul always tells us.
I got a very interesting relationship with Jesus, and I'm gonna tell you right now.
Yes.
Maybe y'all don't get the challenges that come with following and being
100%.
No, I'm just playing with
100%.
you. I think that one of the things that you're getting at though is that I do think it's worth asking, what is the worst that you can happen, right? When I was in Ferguson and I served as a legal advisor on the ground, on my birthday, I had a bulletproof vest on. I acknowledge that the worst that could happen is that I could lose my life. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying everybody needs to have a bulletproof vest on and to go out in the streets. I am saying that when we are told that the more of us that carry our cross, right, that the burden would be lifted, there is an inequity in who's fighting what fight, right? So I'm not saying that we all necessarily need to be out on the street, but I am saying that for all the people that think that just because you work in corporate America and when you get around to it, you're going to give a little bit of a check and that's going to get us free, that ain't going to get us free, right? So I do think that we have to be honest with ourselves, and each person, that is a personal conversation. What do I have to lose, right? Like, I have conversations with corporate spaces that if we're honest, many of them see Pink Cornrows as the right organization that's going to bring them along to ensure that it has a healthier environment so that all people, but especially Black women and women of color, and I say that intentionally, are seen the same way as their counterparts. But I also know that I have a lot to lose. Say they don't like the fact that I have to say your leaders are actually showing trends of racism or showing trends of inequity. That could be my reputation. That could be my next client. That actually can impact me. But you know what? So what? I do think that there is something about being obedient, regardless of what the cost is going to be, because if we're going to raise Christianity and if we're going to raise these scriptures, the only thing that matters is the life of Jesus. And the reality is the end of Jesus's life wasn't that great. I think we just need to be honest. That's a pretty crappy way to go. If you hear, healing people, I'm just going to be honest about that. But I do think that what he is calling for, though, is he is calling for, and I want to say he in a way that's also respectful, that everyone on this call does not necessarily have to be a Christian. I think that's important to state. Everybody does not necessarily have to see the church in the same way. I do want us, though, to recognize that there is a spiritual responsibility. First of all, suppression, white supremacy is a spirit. White supremacy is a system, but white supremacy is a spirit. And I say all that to say that however you define your faith and however you define your walk, that I do think that getting back to your original question, I would love for us to it was great to meet Adaobi through UIU. There are so many Nigerian people, to be honest with you, that are within the movement, Sam included, that I do think we need to be collaborating a lot more. One of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter was Opal Tometi, even though she is not Igbo, she is Nigerian. She is Nigerian American. We have to claim our stake in liberation throughout the globe. 1 out of 6 people in the world is Nigerian. It is time for us to not only just be passive and to say something needs to be done, but to be leaders, because we've been behind the scenes of the work, right? So I do think that it does come at a cost to me to be a lawyer and not be the one that's a partner right now at a firm and has the nice picture on LinkedIn, although my picture on LinkedIn is very cute. But I do think that we have to now start organizing the people that are committed to this type of work, right? And I would love for if there was also a supportive halo, from people that are like, that's not exactly the work that I do, but we're going to support that work because there is a cost to us. And I don't want people to think that this is easy. This is not easy. And we do make choices, and there are other choices that we could make. But just to answer your original question, Uju, about like how we show up in this world, it's not something that doesn't have sacrifice on the other side. But I do think that we can, UIU should start, and not just UIU, other Nigerian associations should really start looking at how do we bring Nigerians at more of a centerfold, that when something happens here, we have a statement. We know we have a statement that's going to go out in support of Black life. But when something also happens at home, we also have a statement, and we'll go to the embassy if need be. And if something happens in South Africa, we're also going to have a statement, because it's about us as a collective. It's not just about us as a tribe. That's what I'm excited about. If anyone's interested in that, I would love to see what that looks like. But I feel upset or sad that I only met Sam and Adobe, and I don't even know if she's gone, but I met them through this space, which makes me wonder how many more of us are out there, right? What do we need to do to start organizing better?
I just want to jump in and add, because I'm paying attention to what's in the chat. Because there's some conversation about when I brought up the point about I need our Igbo men to step up and really create space, and that's true, and I will hold that as true, right? But also there was a conversation around Igbo men and the trauma that they're experiencing, and I want to say, look, patriarchy harms everyone, including the men involved, right? Just like whiteness, right? White supremacy harms everyone, including white people. Right? So patriarchy harms everyone, including the men involved, right? Because of the pressures, you know, patriarchy creates an ideal that you have to now live up to, right? Regardless if that's even an essence of what you want to do. And so patriarchy harms everyone, right? But when I say create spaces for Igbo women to show up, right? By doing that, right, you also create a space for yourself. Right? When Igbo women are able to show up and because you believe their lives matter, and we are able to have and express our visions for ourselves just as much as men are able to have that also creates freedom for yourself. So your freedom is tied to our freedom. Very much so. So I want to be really clear about that, because I saw that conversation in the chat.
Yes, and I did want us to touch on it, but I just want to throw this out there. There are only 20 minutes left, so we are being very timely with this conference. But moral of the story is, if you have any questions, like I said before, we are having an open and honest conversation. So please drop your question in the chat so we can get it queued up, and we're going to throw a few more thoughts to our panelists, but also raise your hand so you can speak aloud as well, and we will call on you. So we'll unmute you upon raising your hand, and let's be respectful of others, their opinions, their thoughts, and their questions, of course. But please, final hard 20 minutes.
Sorry.
And also, Uju, we actually don't have 20 minutes anymore. I'm so sorry. Time just ran by us so fast.
No.
So if we can just finish up with everyone, we'd love to hear final thoughts, how we can stay connected. What do you think we can do? And I mean, this was such a rich session, and really time flew by. So we'll start with Adaobi. Please give us your final thoughts on what we can do as Igbos in the diaspora to help support social justice, you know, in our homes, and how we can contact you, and any other information you would like us to know.
Yeah, I would just say shine a light in the space that you're at, right? Do the work in the space that you navigate and exist in, all the spaces you navigate and exist in. That's from work to home to the communities you occupy. I know I brought this up in the last set of chats we had before, where I talked about speak to your parents, and I know there was hesitancy around that because there was the belief that our parents won't hear us anymore, and I completely disagree with that, right? I think even now more so they'll hear us more than ever. So I think we really need to utilize our voices and not underestimate the power of our voices to shift rooms, to shift narrative. and to do that within the space that you actually occupy and navigate and exist in on a day-to-day basis, whether that's in your workspace, whether that's in your community, or whether that's in your home.
Perfect. Perfect.
We'll hear from, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, well, what I would say is, Proverbs 31:8-9, speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. What can we do as Igbos in the diaspora, as Igbos in America, as Igbos? What can we do? We can speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves. It's very easy. Most people say it's simple, but it's not easy, right? It may cost you something. It may cost you your job. It may cost you your comfort. Sometimes it may even cost you your life, but you will gain so much more than you ever thought. So speak up, speak up, speak up. As far as contacting me, easiest way, just go to my website, right? samachobook.com. Thank you all so much for people who have already checked out the book. If you haven't, just feel free. I'm hoping it's an encouragement to anybody who reads it. Social media as well. I'm at the Sam Acho, but yeah, I'm excited about being able to join you all, and also about that book, because my goal is, we talked about, right? It's to let the world see you. And I'm hoping that all of us can let the world see us. And I think when we do that, I think all of us will feel freedom and a liberation that we haven't experienced.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ify, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Okay.
I will definitely share my LinkedIn with folks. If I can remember it. Okay. But I want to first of all thank the UIU team. Thank you, Uju. Thanks to Sam and Adaobi. And also everyone that spoke throughout the chat. I do think conversation is important. I don't think it's a small thing for us to talk about these issues. One of the things that I think, the first is, I really want to encourage us, and I'm happy to work with the committee on how we start creating this spreadsheet of gifts. I know if we can do the business directory, if we can do directories that showcase other aspects of us, I do think that we need to start. Thank you, Ijoma. See, that's what happens when people just like, you know what I mean? I think we need to start identifying how we show up besides just our titles, right? We all now know that if anything ever happens to you, you can call Sam for a prayer, okay? So we all have different gifts, and we need to start sharing those. The second is, I do think we need to support Black lives, but specifically, if you see a name like Ifoma Sinachi, if you see Adaobi and you see that they're in Minnesota, in Texas, in Dallas, in Atlanta, do the best that you can to reach out to them, support them. There are things that we are carrying that if you're not on the ground, you have no idea. And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, there are struggles and fights that we get from our own community as being Igbo, and also in the community as being part of Black liberation, right? We need uplifting. A card, a note can go a long way. And then finally, lifting up, some people sent me private chats about what are some organizations that we can support? I think that was a beautiful question, and I was caught off guard and I didn't know how to respond. I also think that we should create a spreadsheet of that as well, and that should be inclusive of how UIU, that should be inclusive of the charities that UIU supports, and we should broaden and include tech and make sure that these other spaces where opportunity is there for economic mobility, but we should also not forget climate injustice. We should not forget mothering justice. We should not forget education. There are so many different organizations from people on the ground. And again, you would be surprised how many, especially Igbo people, are behind the scenes making a lot of this movement work. For those that want my email, I will put it in here, but my work email is Ify, which is IFY @pinkcornrows.com. I will put it in the chat. But again, if we can just start organizing and have these as check-ins on progress, I think then we can start building a real movement here. So I thank you all.
Yes. So please feel free, like you said, we should all connect, especially as one Igbo people. And if you want to put your LinkedIn in the group chat, if you want to put your Instagram handle in the group chat, please do so. And of course, our speakers too. I know you may have put it, but a lot of people have been writing in there. So if you want to put your email, your Instagram, your LinkedIn once more so everyone can connect, that would be great. And we're going to move forward, of course, with not just having conversations, but putting tangible action items together as an organization so we can all say we're a part of this and we really exemplified what we can do in this time. So thank you so much for everyone for being a part of this call, for hopping on, and for spending your day, your afternoon, your evening with us, because this has been an amazing conversation. So thank you again to our panelists. Of course.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you guys so much. Della.
Thank you so much, Uju, and the panelists for leading such a hot button topic. We've come a long way, but we have such a long way to go, and it begins with dialogue like this. So Adaobi, my namesake Ifoma, and Sam, thank you so much for your insights and your experience on this issue, and I just look for the best for each and every one of you. Thank you. Yes.